Hello and welcome to Africa 54. I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart, right here in Washington, D.C. Shortly, we hope to join my colleague Haiti Adams at the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington. All right, so we'll begin with an overview of the U.S.-Africa relations, and here is our report from Zoe Ludaki on how Africa has its strategy to engage with the United States during this summit.
Afrocentric and multilateral is how political analysts characterize the White House's strategy towards Africa. The U.S. strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, as it is called, emphasizes the role of the private sector in economic development, in health, infrastructure, finance, clean energy, climate change, and education. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken unveiled the new strategy at the University of Pretoria in South Africa back in August.
What we seek most of all is a true partnership between the United States and Africa. We don't want an imbalanced or transactional relationship.
Bob Wekesa is the Deputy Director at the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg.
The re-engagement with the African continent is quite robust compared to the Trump administration.
Proof of this robust engagement with the continent is the U.S.-Africa Summit, scheduled to take place in Washington, D.C., December 13th through 15th, with the participation of 49 African leaders and the African Union. But what are the outcomes that Africans are looking to achieve?
Africans are likely to arrive there with a major economic agenda. Africa needs lots of infrastructure development. It's one of the least connected continents in the world, even just in terms of road, rail, and seaports. Not talking about other forms of communication such as digital infrastructure, information and communication technologies.
China has been very effective in spearheading major infrastructure projects in a number of African countries. And that raises the issue of whether the United States can compete effectively.
I think the U.S. can compete, and its failure to compete at this point in time has largely been lack of strategy.
This time, the United States intends to promote co-financing of the private sector in energy, health, and digital connectivity.
Even when the U.S. government gets involved in trade and economics relations with the African continent, it lets its private sector be in the driver's seat. So I think the U.S. government is likely to pursue an agenda in which there's a conducive environment for American businesses to thrive on the African continent.
Another issue that African leaders are interested in renegotiating is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, started by the Bush administration in 2001. But this time, African leaders want to be at the negotiating table.
The Africans are saying AGOA was passed by Congress unilaterally without really involvement of Africans on the discussion, the negotiation table. Any new arrangement between Africa and the U.S. should factor in African interests, particularly those that are led by the African Union.
Analysts and Africa's leaders are welcoming this effort of re-engagement between the United States and the continent. Zoe Ludaki, VOA News, Washington.
All right. And so from that scene setter, we go to look at how Africa is focusing on this U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. And here's Juma Majanga with more from Nairobi.
America did not have colonies in Africa, but has maintained deep ties with the continent through investments and different corporations. Analysts, however, say the U.S. grip on Africa is facing serious challenge from emerging powers like China and Russia. Professor Peter Kagwanja is a scholar on African affairs and director of Africa Policy Institute. a research think tank in Nairobi.
China seems to have a more determined and well-financed and well-oiled architecture of engaging Africa as a continent. The U.S. deal with one country after another. Yes, they have 2 ambassadors for the African Union, but the architecture of engaging Africa is not discernible. You cannot see it.
According to Professor Kagwanja, America's emphasis on spreading liberal values is affecting its dominance in Africa.
Hubristic approach to world affairs is what cost America the opportunity to see that there were shifts that were coming. I can almost argue that it did not see China coming. It only realized that China was coming, particularly to Africa, after Johannesburg, when China donated $60 billion for Africa's development. And then by 2018, 3 years later, it donated another $60 billion, which was larger by far than the entire Marshall Plan to Western Europe.
Mugo Kibati, analyst and chief executive officer of Telkom Kenya, holds a different opinion.
I think I see the U.S. to have done very well in ensuring security and peace over the years on the African continent, and has done very well in terms of its security and military presence and also diplomatic presence on the continent over the years, over the decades.
Technology is one of the areas that has seen fierce competition between the US and China in Africa.
Africa is, in terms of technology, especially the mobile technological space, has been a theater of tremendous development over the last 20 years, and there's tremendous growth and innovation yet to come. And as we speak right now, a lot of our, I run a mobile company, and we have many of our users and subscribers using Apple phones, which is an American company, but the parts of those Apple phones, many are made in China or in India or in Israel. And for me, I would like to see some of those parts developed and built in Kenya. That is the kind of engagement I'm talking about.
The upcoming US-Africa Summit in Washington provides opportunity for America to re-engage Africa. As the world's superpowers scramble for influence in Africa, experts say the continent's interest can only be championed from within. Juma Majanga for VOA News, Nairobi, Kenya.
Juma, and let's now go live to my colleague Hedy Adams, who is at the US-Africa Leadership Summit in the center of Washington, D.C. Hello, Hedy.
Hello there, Esther. Thank you so much for crossing here to us. And I have our guest here with us. His name is Nathan Teck, and he's the deputy spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State. Nathan, thank you so much for giving us your time. We know it's a busy week, of course. So even before the summit began, we've started hearing news that President Biden will be making key announcements this week. There's a $55 billion over 3 years, $55 billion US over 3 years to Africa. President Biden is also expected to announce his support for a seat for the African Union at the G20 and also a permanent seat for Africa at the UN Security Council. And then the president plans to make a multi-country trip to Africa next year. That's a lot of dreams come true in 1 week, of course. Tell us, what is the larger, bigger signal the United States is sending to Africa this week?
So we are so delighted to have 49 African leaders here in Washington with us today, and a delegation from the African Union for really a set of robust, comprehensive, high-level conversations about how we can advance shared priorities with leaders of the African continent. The fact is that we see Africa as a rising power, right? Africa is a rising geopolitical player. And the fact is that we have to come to the table with something concrete, and you just outlined some of the concrete deliverables that we're bringing to the table for this conversation, right? And not only that, of course, we want to also make sure there's robust conversations among civil society, among our diaspora, among the youth, and among the business community as well, to ensure that there's a comprehensive, multi-layered partnership between the United States and Africa on both sides of the Atlantic. And so we're really excited for what's happening this week, and we look forward to a lot of really promising conversations.
Well, Nathan, speaking of everything that's being brought to the table. There's talk of significant resources that the United States is bringing to the table. What does that mean, and what do these resources hope to accomplish?
So over the next 3 years, we're going to work with Congress on identifying $55 billion in new initiatives for the African continent. And really, these are going to focus on a wide range of issues, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's addressing the climate crisis and ensuring resiliency and adaptability in the face of climate change, whether it's strengthening institutions and strengthening civil society and a number of our key shared priorities of democracy on the continent as well. So really, we're committed to really having something concrete as a result of these meetings.
And of course, it's not lost on anyone that the issue around China's influence on the continent, Russia's influence on parts of the continent, how concerned is the United States about sort of these trends emerging in Africa?
Well, look, this week's conversations and this week's summit, it's not about China, it's not about Russia, it's about the United States and Africa and what we can do together collaboratively. This is not about working for Africa, it's about working with Africa and having a positive agenda that we can bring to the table. And I think that's what you're going to see over the course of this week. Just in a few minutes, we're going to have a conversation on peace, security, and governance led by Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and USAID Administrator Power to talk about how peace and security are all interlinked and with good governance and stability in the region. Tomorrow, we've got a really robust conversation between civil society, the Africa Business Forum, that will result in a lot of new deals. So really, we're really excited for all the things that are happening, and we encourage your viewers to stay tuned.
Well, Nathan, just finally, if there is one concrete thing the United States is hoping everyone can walk away with this week, what would you say that would be?
Well, it's that the United States is committed to a modernized partnership with the continent of Africa, one that reflects the challenges of the 21st century, one that shows how important we view the continent and how we are committed to a long-term sustainable diplomatic engagement with its governments, with its people, and with its businesses.
Nathan, thank you so much. Good luck with the summit. We'll see what comes out of it come Thursday. Thank you so much. Nathan Tech is the deputy spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State. Esther, I'm going to take it back to you now in the studio.
Heidi, you're wonderful. Thank you very much. Members of the African diaspora from Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe were asked about the expectations of the U.S. African Leaders Summit. Here are their concerns and messages to President Joe Biden.
My message to the States of America and President Biden is to work into response to climate crisis, whereby we call upon all the leaders to invest much in adaptation of sustainable energy that can be used for clean cooking, especially in African countries where people mostly use biomass energy. We call upon all of them to invest much in the technology, whereby we inquire or we request the assistance in technology, whereby their expertise can assist our individuals here to learn from them, but also to make the energy become reliable to the local vendors or the local customers that are going to use, especially in African countries. As this will proceed, or as this will proceed, it will help the reduction of emission to the air that contributes to the climate change.
The message I have to the United States and President Biden is to work on areas that further solidify the U.S.-African relations by giving due concern to continental interest of Africa. Almost 60% of the African population is under the age of 25. That makes Africa the youngest continent of the world. Hence, U.S. has to invest more deeply on this young and energetic continent.
The message I have for the United States and President Biden is that they moved more initiatives to help African countries and strengthen its relationships, especially with things to do with climate and health issues. We also want US to help in the post-pandemic recovery of Zimbabwe so that more vaccines continue to be rolled out, because according to some researchers, there's going to be a shortage of vaccines by 2023.
members of the African diaspora on what they expect during the three-day U.S.-African Leaders Summit here in Washington. For more on the ongoing U.S.-African Leaders Summit, I'm joined by Omolara Okunubi, CEO and Executive Director of Ideal Program Services, a community advocate and founder of Compassion Without Border. Lara, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
First of all, your reaction to what we just heard from the Africans there, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Ethiopia.
Yes, it's exciting. All of those issues they mentioned, they're in line. But I'm also here representing my organization, NAPAC, Nigerian American Public Affairs Committee. And NAPAC would like to see that the Biden administration introduce or fund, curriculum in terms of education, that we can create green advocates of Nigeria, green advocates of Tanzania, green advocates of Sierra Leone, because this will speak towards the agenda of renewable energy, climate change, and especially empowering students at a young age from secondary school to they graduate, which makes them more relevant in finding jobs when they come out of colleges.
Lara, let's focus now on the ongoing summit right here in Washington, D.C., because in recent years we haven't seen this kind of engagement. We see a lot of excitement during this particular summit in 2022. What has changed, and how can African leaders maximize on their connection right now with the United States?
Well, there's a gap in the middle that still needs to be filled. But first of all, I want to commend the Biden administration.
All right, we're going to go back to Haiti in a moment. We'll be back with you, Lara. Okay. Haiti, take it over again.
Esther, thank you so very much. I have with me here Ignatius Anor, and you may have seen some of his work on voaafrica.com. He's a great analytical reporter, and he joins me here. Now, Ignatius, you have been covering this even before this summit began. I read your work, and I'm a great fan all the time. So tell us a little bit about what people have been telling you. How are they feeling about the summit and about the timing of this summit? Why is it so urgent? Why now?
Thank you very much, Haiti. So it's a feeling of optimism. Mm-hmm. It's a feeling of, for years, the U.S. used to be one of the biggest investors on the African continent. And over the last decade, we have a continent like China take over. There were inroads that have been made by Russia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. And now the U.S. essentially is saying that not only are we back, we want this relationship to be a partnership, essentially a win-win situation. You'll recall that a survey recently indicated that by 2050, would have people under the age of 25, essentially young people on the African continent, being half of the population. And so it's scrambled for the African continent. It's the U.S. recognizing the African continent as the new voice in the geopolitical space. I speak to analysts all the time, and what they are saying is that Africa has a lot of power now. It has the resources, which the West and the East often go there for. Not only that, it also has the human capital, with youth being at the forefront of development on the continent. Social media is giving them that power to do so. And so it's sort of like the bride, as an African proverb would say, the bride being courted by so many people. So it's a critical moment for the African continent now. Yesterday I spoke to one of the analysts with the Endowment Democracy, and he talked about the fact that it's a right time for the African continent to start to make demands and tell the U.S. that if you want us to work with you, it has to be on our terms. It wasn't what happened in the past, but it looks like the African continent has now positioned itself to the point where the U.S. is saying, we want to get serious with you.
And it's just like Nathan Tech said earlier here from the U.S. State Department, that they're looking for a modern partnership with Africa. Now, of course, Ignatius, a modern partnership with Africa, given what Africa has to offer, costs money. Is the U.S. willing to put its money where its mouth is? And is Africa saying, all fine and well, but show us the money?
Well, not only has the U.S. shown incredible commitment as far as putting resources on the table, you do know just a day ahead of the summit, Jake Sullivan announced $55 billion for the African continent over the next 3 years. And the White House says this more than has been provided by any of the big continent that are clamoring for power and the attention of the African people. And also, Anthony Blinken, who is Secretary of State, has been to Africa since he has served in the administration twice already. He was there last August, visited countries like Congo and the DRC and Rwanda, for example. So the administration is saying that we are more than committed to partnering with the African continent by making these resources available. Not only that, this morning, Anthony Blinken spoke at the African Diaspora and Young Leaders Forum, where he talked about increasing investment opportunities between small businesses and entrepreneurs on the continent. And essentially, he also said that for the next couple of days, which is the duration of the conference, they will be announcing other programs and exchange projects between partners in Africa and in the U.S. to demonstrate its commitment to deepening this relationship they hope to build with Africans.
Well, Ignatius, this is certainly going to be a very interesting summit. And of course, as we have said, this is just the opening. So it all remains to be seen what comes out of the summit, how much is really substantive, what are African leaders and representatives from all the African countries and the African Union actually going to walk away with come Thursday here. But in the meantime, you please stay tuned to our coverage, The Voice of America. We will bring you coverage from the summit every single day this week up until Thursday when the summit comes to an end. And with that, I'm going to send it back to the studio to you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you, Ignatius. So let's continue our conversation here, Lara. Again, the continent of Africa this time round has seen a kind of a different approach from the United States, with President Joe Biden inviting 49 heads of state, and they are right here in D.C. How can they maximize on this opportunity?
Well, first of all, I want to commend the Biden administration for taking center stage on this and making everybody aware of what's going on and putting some funding, on this project. However, the information is still fragmented, so is the outreach. It's not enough, because in the middle, the diasporans are not involved. The women, they're not enough of the women involved. They're not enough of the youth. I attended a youth event yesterday. There were hardly any youth there. So we need to have a platform where everybody can come together and really express what their preferences are, where their expectations are, and how this money is going to be spent. Especially you're talking about the SMEs, the small, medium enterprises. They cannot be discounted. They are the backbone of every economy. So this money that is being given to all the African leaders, it's great that they're talking to the leaders, because from the policy point of view, whatever we do has to be supported with the policy. Right? But when it comes to accountability, everybody should be held accountable, from the leadership to the middlemen and the locals. But we are trying to create a fusion between those of us in diaspora and all the other people that are resident in various countries in Africa, whether Nigeria, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Sierra Leone, Kenya, until we create that fusion. And technology has been very helpful for all of us. So there's no limit to where we can connect, but everybody needs to be at the table.
Talking about, technology, the private sector, the United States private sector, is a very big player in this summit, and they are going to be engaging these leaders. What do you think the African leaders should be looking forward to seal the kind of deals that are going to be relevant for the continent?
Well, the African leaders should invite the big players like Facebook, Meta, Google, all these big technology organizations that have a wider reach and have some kind of a special agreement with them, because this is a space where the youth, especially, where they play, okay? And this technology has no bound. It can reach everybody. Information can be shared, data can be collected, conversations can be held, because until we all really come together and harmonize all these different fragments of needs, we're not going to get anywhere. The tools are there, like technology. The tools are there, but the tools have been utilized in a way that it produces the outcome that we all desire. Otherwise, it would just still be talk, no action.
This past weekend, Lara, you had an event with the African diaspora. You also engaged a lot of, U.S. elected officials that are of African descent. What do they expect to see coming out of this summit?
Well, they were all excited. First of all, we congratulate all of them for being elected. But they were reminded also, they know that they want to be part of reforming the policy. They want to be part of making new policies, because the community has changed. So should the voices and the representation. So they're glad to be frontliners, and they're still going to be on the mainstream. We're not looking at them as African leaders. No, they are leaders for all. wherever they play. So they're looking to be part of reviewing the policies, reforming it to make sure that it aligns with the new demographics that we have. So they're excited to really have their voices heard and make sure that the preferences of every American is addressed.
So Hedy just spoke about the $55 billion that the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke about the commitment the U.S. is making to spend $55 billion in the next 3 years in Africa. What do you think should be priority for Africa right now? If you think about 3 things that they should use this money for, what would those be?
Well, the lowest hanging fruit is food. So food insecurity is #1. Followed by security issues, and then, of course, technology. These 3 are key, but I don't know where to put climate change because that's also evolving. There are so many areas. There's also securitization of bonds. There's diaspora investment. There's so many things. And, we don't need to probably pitch one over the other. They're all important. And $55 billion is a lot of money. Again, I want to applaud the Biden administration for taking leadership in the financial space. There are so many. For us at NAPAC, capacity development hinges over all of these areas. So we can develop individual capacity, corporate capacity, systemic capacities. Without capacity development, we're just going to be playing, ring around the collar. So, but that's not what we want to do. There's a lot of money being put behind this. I want to make sure it's fully utilized. 5 years from now, we want to say, okay, ABC outcomes have been achieved. And that's where we need to go.
And what about the proposal that President Biden is talking about, including Africa on the G20,
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's about time. Absolutely. And beyond that also, diaspora needs to be another category. I know that the African Development and United Nations have done that, but in the Biden administration, diaspora needs to be another category when these leadership summits are held.
Right. Lara, thank you so much. We could talk for a long, long time. Lara Mulara Okunubi is the CEO and Executive Director of Ideal Program Services, a community advocate and founder of Compassion Without Border. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. Good night from Washington.